The year was 1921. On September 4th, a severe tropical cyclone developed, reaching hurricane intensity. By September 7th, it combined with a high-pressure system producing torrential downpour and record rainfall over the entire state of Texas. This Category 1 hurricane brought damaging floods, and the hardest hit was San Antonio. The flood put 9 feet of water on Houston Street downtown, with $19 million in property loss and the death of 50 people. The aftermath of the flood spurred the mid-1920s construction of the Alamos Dam 5 miles north of downtown. Plans were also proposed to pave over the storm sewers along the prominent area of the river downtown called Great Bend. Paving the storm sewers was not a popular idea. By 1929, there was much talk about the river. The city had to do something. A cutoff channel was also proposed. That idea met with public approval. However, there was still a push to pave over Great Bend. Wives of prominent businessmen were staunch opponents and managed to kill the idea. But what was to replace it?
So Hugman had an idea, a big idea.
27-year-old architect Robert H. Hugman began thinking about the problem and came up with an idea. He called on Mrs. Lane Taylor, the president of the San Antonio Conservation Society, to share his idea. She endorsed his thinking and set out socializing it with other businessmen's wives, city commissioners, the chambers of commerce, mayor's office, and city engineers.
Robert Hugman clearly was a design genius, and his masterpiece, of course, is the San Antonio Riverwalk. From a technical side, he did 4 or 5 things that are really define the Riverwalk. First, he solved the flood problem that had almost caused the Riverwalk itself to be paved over in the 1920s. He made the Riverwalk walkable. He also made the river itself comfortable and easily navigable. And finally, he was really thinking ahead of his time, I think, in terms of some of the ability of his design to be flexible. Technically, he was brilliant. From an aesthetic point of view, is where his genius really showed through.
So when Hugman began designing the Riverwalk in the 1920s, he really took inspiration from the time that he had spent in New Orleans, which is a city that celebrates its French heritage. And he really thought that San Antonio was missing out on an opportunity to better share its Spanish heritage and build upon its Spanish heritage.
Hugman had spent 3 years living in New Orleans and was impressed with the conservation movement he witnessed there. The preservation of the old world charm, local color, and the character of the French Quarter. He built on that concept and applied this experience to San Antonio.
The Arneson River Theater is a great example of Hugman's brilliance. He also, in my opinion, did some brilliant architectural work. There's 2 prime buildings there, one on the stage, which recalls a portion of a Spanish mission or a Spanish villa, and the one on the other side, which is the concessions building, that to me would look right at home in the Canary Islands.
And then also just a concept of having more like retail opportunities and commercial opportunities along the river.
His plan called for the construction of small shops, apartments, cafes, cabarets, and dance clubs along the riverbanks. Shops would be accessed through footbridges and cobblestone walking paths. Gondolas would glide along the river with strains of music in the air and fantastic shadows cast from street lamps. He named his vision the Shops of Aragon and Romula. His plan presented an opportunity for unlimited development of beauty and interest, the advantages of which included advertising the city and increasing the tourism industry. Within the chaos of the city, he envisioned the serenity of a park at river level.
I think of the Riverwalk as a series of outdoor rooms. Hugman manipulated the scale and used the natural scale of the surrounding buildings to his advantage. He used the curvature of the river to establish vistas. You really have edges no matter where you're looking. You're not typically looking down a long, extended view, so there's a sense of closure The vegetation and the buildings form the walls of the room, and of course the sky is the ceiling, but it is comfortable to humans. It's as if you're in a series of courtyards, and as you move along, each new one is a surprise. This is not accidental. It's actually the key to why this works, in my opinion, and why most people in cities who've tried to copy the Riverwalk fail, because they don't understand the scale.
Channel cutoffs were built to stop the flooding. However, Hugman's design for the shops of Aragon and Romula to create water-level retail development were not possible due to lack of funding. The National Depression of 1929 hit San Antonio hard in 1934. Beginning in 1936, the city began receiving make-work projects to stimulate the economy. Hugman was involved as an architect in several of them. During this time, Jack White, manager of the Plaza Hotel, called on City Hall to see if they would clean up that dirty little river next to his hotel. It was at that meeting Jack White learned of Hugman's concept and got in touch with him. With Hugman's sketches in hand and estimates from the Works Progress Administration, commonly called the WPA, the price tag for the project came in at $380,000. WPA told San Antonio they would need to raise an additional $75,000. A bargain, yes, but the money was just not available. A plan was hatched to raise the necessary funds with a bond. Mr. D.D. Book, a property owner who needed to approve the bond, was quite vocal with his objections and a strong disbeliever in Hugman's vision to create viable commerce along the riverfront. "The river projects will never amount to a hill of beans, and if you ever see more than 2 people walk on the Riverwalk at any time, I'll eat your hat." He was finessed into approving the bond through the aid of drink, and the bond passed. Work began with sidewalks and bridges. Riverwalk construction was completed in 1940, but still the business did not come.
It wasn't until the hotels were built for Hemisphere in the 60s that life really was breathed back into the Riverwalk.
The project finally realized its potential in 1968 when the World's Fair came to San Antonio and business began eagerly populating the Riverwalk. The Riverwalk's popularity has steadily grown ever since. If Hugman were alive today, I'm sure he would be smiling on San Antonio. He lived until 1980 and witnessed his dream come true. He loved the Riverwalk. It was his proudest accomplishment.
The Riverwalk has really shaped San Antonio's development.
In 2014, 9.3 million non-residents visited our city exclusively to see the Riverwalk. And millions more flocked to her banks when here for conventions, business, and other travel. $2.4 billion are spent each year on the Riverwalk, supporting more than 31,000 jobs.
Obviously, no one has been able to replicate the magic that is the San Antonio Riverwalk, but its impetus for development and growth in downtown has been undeniable.
History has a funny way of writing itself, with as many twists and turns as the river itself. If a flood hadn't occurred, if Hugman hadn't lived in New Orleans, if the manager of the Plaza Hotel hadn't wanted that dirty little river cleaned up, if the wives of businessmen hadn't objected to paving over Great Bend, if the Conservation Society hadn't endorsed Hugman's plan, if property owners hadn't approved the bond to fund the project, if our nation hadn't fallen in the Great Depression, if President Franklin D. Roosevelt hadn't developed the WPA, if San Antonio hadn't hosted the World's Fair in 1968, we wouldn't be here today with our jobs, businesses, prosperity, and our beautiful Riverwalk, the crown jewel of San Antonio.
He had poured himself into this Riverwalk, just poured himself into it, and to me it's still here. He's still here. He'd be very proud again to see what's continued to be the centerpiece of his life. Now it's the centerpiece of San Antonio.
Robert H. Hugman, a man with a dream and a plan who inextricably impacted the future of San Antonio more than any other person.
He designed that. That was him.
He is remembered with a bust on the Riverwalk. His Riverwalk. Our Riverwalk. Your Riverwalk.